welcome to the podcast, Sav. Good
Hi.
to have you.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thank
I
you.
always feel very strange recording with friends because it's like we chat all the time and now I'm just sat here with cameras on you recording you.
It's just like one of our DMCs, but with some microphones in front of us.
Yes, and without a Domino's.
Without a Domino's, yeah.
Usually a Domino's. Let's begin at the start. I think that's the best place to begin. So, Mixtons, where does the story start?
Yeah, we originally launched our cocktail company under the brand name Knocktails, and it was very much the principle of it was an e-commerce company launched during lockdown, and it was a play on words, obviously knocking on people's doors with the delivery of cocktails. So that was very much the principle behind it, and we launched that in November 2020.
What a time to start a business.
I know.
Not even just before or at the start of a global pandemic, but as we're like in the midst of it.
Yeah, I think it was just as we were heading into the second lockdown, because we had like a month lockdown just before Christmas, and that was 2 weeks after we launched the company.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what is that origin story? Because we should give some context here that it's not just you running Mixtons.
No.
You've got two co-founders. How did three, like, I feel like two people coming together to start the business is one thing, but three people coming together, how did that happen? How did it come to be in that November?
So Ranj and Sim, two of my closest friends. So I met them both whilst I was at uni. Ranj used to own a mobile bar company. So they used to have a fleet of converted VW vans where the roof would lift up and they would do festivals and private parties around the UK. So obviously when lockdown hit for those guys, so Sim used to be his manager, all of their events got cancelled for the summer, and they were kind of sat at home twiddling their thumbs, wondering when life would go back to normal, and it obviously kept getting extended and extended. And me at the time, I was working on another startup, and that was a travel-focused startup. So of course, as soon as lockdown hit, that got completely obliterated as well. And one day, Ranj called me out of the blue, and I think it was in May 2020, he called me and said that he had loads of friends and family asking him how to make cocktails at home. And he had a bit of a brainwave and said, well, what if I send them to people? Because he's really known as the cocktail guy, the cocktail guru in our friendship circles.
What a kind of, what's the right word for this? Like, what a thing to be known for.
I know.
I really rate that.
I know. He's known as like the party bringer. So anytime Ranj is around is pretty much guaranteed to have a good time. It's going to have cocktails. It's going to have good music. It's going to have...
Rate that.
He's just that guy. So... He was getting contacted by friends and family, myself included. He had this kind of light bulb idea and called me in May, and I gave him a few tips and pointers, and I said, why don't you go do this, put this together? And 2 months later, he came to me with the first prototype. I was actually the first person to ever buy a box of Knocktails on the Shopify store, because originally I wasn't part of the company. I was just a friend supporting him, giving him ideas, but he had a lot of the company already put together by that point.
And at the time, I should say, you were doing your own thing.
I was trying to pivot my business away from travel towards sustainability, but we were really struggling because we had a team of 8 at the time, and they all got hit really hard personally, so we were just trying to string together things that was impossible, basically. So I was also in a place of kind of feeling a little bit lost and looking potentially for the next thing. When I ordered the first box of Knocktails, the first customer ever on Shopify, because he didn't actually tell me they were doing a free giveaway. So all of my other friends got a free box of Knocktails and I paid.
That's amazing.
Which I still hold him to to this day.
Cool to be able to say your first ever customer was you.
Yeah,
You know, like in America, they put like the first dollar they made on the wall.
Exactly.
It's technically your money.
Exactly.
I rate that.
We met a couple of weeks later after I received the box, and I loved the cocktails, and I basically sat them down and tried to convince them to let me join. Because we all came from such different backgrounds, I knew that I could add a lot of value, and equally I knew that I couldn't do it without them and they couldn't do it without me. It was almost like the perfect trifecta. So they agreed. I managed to convince them to let me in. And then we bought initially what we thought was about 6 months worth of stock. And this was October the 16th. I remember the date like really vividly. And we sold that out in about 2.5 weeks. So it just went crazy, because as soon as that second lockdown came, people were stuck at home looking for ways to gift for Christmas. Then what started happening is people who were working in offices could no longer do their Christmas parties. So we ended up doing virtual cocktail masterclasses for people where we'd send the individual ingredients to to employees, and we would host these online virtual masterclasses on Zoom. And that really, really helped us to scale up quickly to begin with. And we ended up working with about 120 corporate clients from like Sky, Deliveroo, BlackRock, Stella McCartney, all of the big companies in the UK, and ended up sending about 7,000 parcels in the first 3 months. So it was busy.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
So you proper went from zero to hero of not even being in this company to it then being incredibly full on. And I find that really interesting because I remember when we went into lockdown, obviously the immediate thing for all business owners was panic. Like, what's this going to mean for my business? And of course, so many industries were really negatively impacted.
Yeah.
But there was this kind of undercurrent of everyone being quite curious, I think, to see, well, what impact is this going to make in a positive way? And it's so interesting how many, especially kind of e-commerce businesses, actually were really propelled as a result of lockdown.
Massively.
And I guess it was the same for you guys.
Massively. I mean, I think the entirety of the ecosystem within e-commerce got boosted because suddenly people were stuck at home. People were looking for, I think the attitudes, particularly since COVID, have shifted in consumer behavior towards more experiential, more premiumization, more kind of things that really add value to people's lives, as opposed to, I think it's because COVID really gave people perspective of what's important, to take a moment to slow down, to enjoy your life, to treat yourself every now and then. And that led to a lot of smaller e-commerce companies really benefiting because that's what their value proposition is typically. They're trying to do something different. They're trying to do something sustainable and really value-driven. And that is where I think we're still seeing the kind of residual effect of that now because consumer habits have changed inevitably. So we were just part of that group of people that did benefit from everything that happened.
And what's so interesting is that that's like a contained kind of ecosystem or version of the economy. Like, we'll never experience that combination of people's feelings and budgets and spending habits and desires and problems again. But it's so fascinating, I think, especially in like years to come, to really look at what effect that's had on so many businesses. So obviously in that time, like you said, things were crazy full on. I mean, Phil, I would say I know a bit of it, but the listeners in a little bit, like, what does that look like behind the scenes? Like, that many orders going out. I can imagine you don't yet have the kind of operations and processes in place or the budget yet in order to make that really kind of streamlined.
No. So when we originally launched Knocktails, we were selling cocktails in little plastic pouches and we were hand filling them. So we had a litre jug, plastic jug, where we would make the cocktail. We would then pour that litre jug into the plastic pouches and you could make 5 cocktails out of 1 jug. And we were doing about 700 to 800 cocktails a day that way.
That's a lot of jugs.
And then you'd have to hand label each plastic pouch twice, front and back. And then we would have to make the boxes, fill the boxes, because we used to add garnishes and home hacks cards. And the garnishes we used to use, it's changed a lot since then, but we used to use like fresh mint. So we'd individually take mint leaves, put them in little plastic pouches, put them in the box. And that was just one garnish. We had about 4 or 5 at one point. So it was really, really, really time consuming. But we knew that over time it would get better. And we just had to get through the tough bit in order to see how can we improve? What are the areas that need most improvement? And really, we wouldn't have been able to get to the point where we are now without having been in those trenches at the time. So we were operating in Sim's kitchen for the best part of about 4 months. And then because we were in lockdown 3 in early 2021, we managed to strike a deal with a bar where they were closed. And we said, look, we'll pay you a couple of £100 a month if we can use your space. So we would operate out of there every single day. We would kind of open up our operations, make all of our cocktails. We would then drive from the bar in Guildford to the local APC drop-off point at 3:30. And that was a constant stress every single day.
I was going to say, were you racing to hit that
racing
point?
Every day, and there were so many days where we were late, and we'd have to load them into the APC trucks for them because the people weren't there to do it. It was carnage, just pure carnage. And then there was the impact of not only COVID but also Brexit on import. So when we were running out of stock, we had no idea that we had to buy stock ahead of time. So we would run out and then realise that we'd run out, and then it was carnage.
What kept you going in those early days? Because I can imagine it's exciting and it's new, but that wears off after a few weeks of craziness, doesn't it? So you said it was kind of knowing that at some point it would get better, but when you were in those trenches, what kept the three of you showing up to Sim's house every day?
Well, I think there's a certain beauty in the early days where no matter how tough it is, you reach the end of the day and you see the pile of boxes that you've made. Like quite often it would be between kind of 70 and 100 boxes. And there's a sense of fulfillment there that kind of eliminates all of the stress, because you know that there's going to be 70 to 100 people every single day receiving our cocktails, receiving something that we've created by hand, every single part of it, that made it easy. It definitely reached a point towards like 3 or 4 months in where we knew that we had to radically change things in order to just cope with the amount of orders we were getting. So the next kind of process for us that allowed us to remain engaged was figuring out how to improve it, because if you're that way inclined, that's a really fun process. So we took great joy in figuring out, okay, we can't keep filling by hand. How do we scale that process up? We can't individually bag mint leaves. How do we scale that process up? So I think that challenge enabled us to remain engaged to the same extent, because it provided us enough kind of hunger to really keep going through the tough points.
Yeah, and it's those early days where it's like, and I think business often always feels this way, but it's especially scrappy, and it's just, you've got to get your head down and do the work. There is something quite addictive about that, isn't there? Like, this is going to sound really weird, but almost enjoying how hard it is. Like the feeling of being tired but still showing up to work. Like there's something about that I find quite satisfying.
Definitely. And I think it's something that I've noticed between us boys, but also between other co-founders that I speak to. There's a certain inclination within entrepreneurs in general that thrive in those moments, because if you were to collapse and fall over and say, this is too tough, I can't do this, or this challenge is insurmountable, then you wouldn't make it past month one, realistically. And what I found is actually the opposite. When we're in moments of calm and peace and things are going well, we're almost more anxious, because we're either waiting for the next thing to come, or not that it's boring, but it's just not as challenging. It's not as
there's a sense of ease, isn't there?
Yeah.
I remember that for me was where, on paper, my new business came from, was just because I felt it was too easy.
Right.
And it made me laugh every time I came to that conclusion, because I was like, this is meant to be the dream. Like what you're meant to do is get through the scrappy phase, be paying yourself a salary. It's consistent. It's got ease to it. Don't get me wrong, you still have to put work in, but it got to that point. And I was like, most people run a business to get here. I've got here and now I'm bored and I want to get back to that bit that feels scrappy and that feels hard work.
And I think that's one great learning that I've had, and I know the boys have had too, is that it has fuck all to do with the end goal, and it's always the process. Because we set ourselves goals last year that we hit and overachieved on massively, and it's always underwhelming when you get there.
Yeah.
And then it makes you appreciate the process of, right, how did we actually get to that point? How did we sell 10,000 boxes? How do we raise investment? How do we do all these things that we thought were the end goal? It's because of the process and how, like, the journey that we took in order to get there. And that's why I'm a pretty firm believer in my personal life too, of setting goals that you can't actually ever fulfill.
Interesting. What's one of your goals that you can't ever fulfill?
To be happy. Or to be content, to be even keeled. So I wouldn't even say to be happy as a goal, but to be as even keeled as I can be as a human. That is a personal goal of mine, and it's never achievable because we're human. So we're going to go through ebbs and flows of life. But if I have the constant goal of being as evenly balanced and well-rounded as I can be, then I'm pointing towards something, which I think all humans need. You need to set the course of the ship in some direction, but equally you need to know that it's not about trying to get there, because you're constantly going to be sailing until the day you die. Your boat is sailing, right? So whatever you achieve, they're just kind of milestones. There might be places you stop off and see whilst you're on your ship, but the bigger direction has to be unachievable in a way.
I think we've all been there when you set those goalposts and you reach it and it feels incredibly unfulfilling, and you almost have to like force yourself to be like, yeah, let's celebrate this is really good. But I wonder if that's a learning curve all business owners go through at some point. I know I have, where you realize actually it's so much more about like you said, the journey. And I guess more about not what the goals are, but what they represent.
Yeah.
You know, what are your values, what's your purpose, what's your mission? Actually, the tangible stuff, you know, how many orders you sell or how much money you've made, that's all just kind of ways to measure or indicate that those things are being achieved. But it's not about that, is it?
No, it's all bullshit. It's all, none of those things will ever give you fulfillment. And the thing I realized really early on, and why I'm so grateful to be in the position that I am, is that I get to go to work every day and work with two of my closest friends. We have a number of employees now that we love and are part of the family, and there's no hierarchy between kind of us and them. We're one big group of people that are trying to get to a place, and that place is unachievable because we want to be the biggest cocktail brand in the world. That's our kind of end goal, if you like. By having the end goal, if we're able to get to any rung on that ladder, then we'll be happy. But as long as the journey to get there was enjoyable, because I would much rather have a smaller company that's fun to work with than a big company that's miserable to work with. And if we have employees that are miserable, I don't want to be that boss. I don't want to be that person. I want to create a work culture, a work environment that I would want to work for. And therefore, if that means scaling down the company a tiny bit, then I'd much rather that.
I find that so validating and comforting to hear, because I think I'm of that same mindset of actually I care about how it feels way more than how it looks and, you know, the numbers. But we live in a world, and especially the business space is so focused on constant, you know, quantitative growth, and actually realizing, ultimately it comes down to if you're having fun, if you're enjoying it, or whatever else those measures are for you. All of the other stuff, it's not irrelevant, but it's not the most important thing.
They're important things to enable you to get there. But instead of viewing building a company as a set of actions that help you or enable you to get money, view it as you're building a company that makes money to enable you to have fun.
Yes.
And that's kind of the perspective shift that I've had in the last year, is we get so much pleasure out of the good moments with each other and with our employees and with the people that we work with every single day, that if we're able to grow and have more people part of that process, great. But inevitably, if we were to sell the company in 5 years' time and all make a shit ton of money, but have none of that kind of personal fulfillment, what's it for? And that's really where I've changed. I've almost done a full 360 since when I first started out in entrepreneurship, because I think most people when they start out have some sense of focus on the financial aspect of it, and it's only through learning and going through it have I realized that it actually has nothing to do with that. It's a cherry on top, don't get me wrong. We live in a capitalistic society. It's a necessity to have profit in a company, but I don't think it's the reason for being, if you like.
I couldn't agree more. And money is a tool at the end of the day. Like, it's not about hoarding as much as you can, it's getting it so then you can use it for the things that are important to you. Totally. I shared recently that my revenue was down last year from the year before. And when I was presented with that information, genuinely the person that presented it to me said it like they were telling me that someone had died. Like, it was like the worst news, and it was like, you know, they were trying to soften the blow and talk to him about how we could improve it. And I just ended up saying, like, I really don't care. Like, all of the other things are up: profit, fulfillment, impact, how value driven the business is. And I'm like, that's just one of the numbers. But it's so easy, isn't it? You know, even 6 years in, to still try and go for the shiny, and then you kind of have to talk yourself out of it, don't you? And go, no, actually, that's not what's really important here.
So my best friend, when we first met 6-7 years ago, he said a saying to me that I've never forgotten since, and it's that money is energy. So instead of viewing money as the goal, view it as the enabler, the thing that allows you to do the things that you want to do in life. So whatever fulfills you, whether that's traveling, whether that's having a security for your family, whether that's giving back to your community, whatever it is, view money as the thing that helps get you there, and not the end thing that you're constantly chasing. Because ultimately, anyone that ever chases money is never going to be happy, because you're never going to have enough money to fulfill your desires and your kind of greed. And I'm a firm believer in that.
I think that's very true. And you were talking previously about how for you it's not about the money, it's about enjoying the process and it feeling fulfilling and fun. Are there times over the Mixtons journey where it hasn't felt that way and that's prompted for you to change something?
Totally. So, I mean, personally, we didn't pay ourselves for the first year, almost. I think it was 11 months until we paid ourselves. So that was personally challenging, but it certainly wasn't to a point where it made me question what we were doing. I knew that we would reach a point where we could start paying ourselves, and ultimately, like what we're paying ourselves now is nowhere near what people that I know in different positions are being paid, but it's enough to live a life. It's enough to buy food, and that's all we need right now. So personally, it's never been a motivator for me, but from a business perspective, we've come close to collapsing, I'd say 4 or 5 times, where we've had, one day I remember we had £11 in the bank and we had a debt, or we owed on a credit card about 25 grand. We had 3 days to make 25 grand. And that happened in various circumstances a few times along the journey where we didn't know enough about the financial health of the company. We didn't know how to stock manage. We didn't know how to foresee things that like our first VAT bill, for example, was a huge surprise to us. So there's just lots of things that we've had to learn the hard way. But again, I think being in those trenches is ultimately the most rewarding thing, because you then understand so much more through having those difficulties.
How did you get from that place, £11 in the bank, to obviously still running the business now?
Yeah. No.
What got you out of it?
Timing. Really fortunate timing. So as we came out of lockdown, we started to diversify the business, because we knew even before lockdown started easing that our e-commerce business would decline naturally, because people would start going out again, and we knew that we had a value proposition that would fit not only the at-home model but also the trade model, so selling into venues, so pubs, bars, hotels, restaurants, and also the event space. So for us, we started running events last year, and it just so happened that the biggest event that we had last year was in that 3-day window where we were 25 grand down, and we just about managed to pay it off, I think, and we had £220 left after paying it off.
Wow.
So again, we were caught in that cycle of constantly chasing ourselves from a cash flow perspective, which is probably the most challenging thing you have to go through as a business owner.
Especially as a business like yourself that has such clear overheads and product cost.
Exactly. But once you can get past that point, if you can achieve product market fit, there are quite a few kind of options and ways around it. And I think the biggest thing for us and the biggest bolster for us was the fact that we did diversify, because there are a lot of other companies in our space that popped up, particularly bars who started doing at-home services whilst they were closed. A lot of those shut down because they tried to continue down the e-commerce route, whereas we managed to foresee it early enough, and we managed to kind of pivot the business away from it.
And I think that's something a lot of businesses have felt since lockdown. I think even in, the space that I'm in, like service-based businesses, people's buying behavior and people's interaction with businesses was so different in lockdown to normal life. Like it wasn't a false economy, but it was definitely a different economy. And yeah, I think for a lot of the businesses that didn't foresee that shift, it's been a really difficult transition, because you almost don't realize it until it's not necessarily too late, but a problem, right? People are suddenly realizing we're not making the money that we could or should be making, or, we scaled up in lockdown and actually now our sales aren't bringing in the revenue that we need to facilitate, how we scaled things. And I think that's a really valuable lesson, whether you made that mistake or not, to always be trying to think, right, what's the next shift and how can we prepare for that? And I'd imagine it wasn't seamless. You still felt the impact of coming out of lockdown, but you'd at least prepared somewhat.
The timing for us was funny, because we decided to rebrand at the same time that we started coming out of lockdown. So for us, our e-commerce business started to naturally decline. And I think it was June, which was the month that everything opened up back to quote unquote normal. The 5th of June, we rebranded, and we kind of announced our rebrand. So for 3 months prior to that, we'd been working on it. That timing was really tricky, because we were balancing a decline in revenue with an increase in outgoings because we paid for the rebrand. We had to buy a load of new stock. And that was definitely, in retrospect, timing-wise, a mistake, I'd say. So again, we learnt the hard way, but it inevitably was the right decision for where we are today.
And is that the rebrand that was linked to you having to change the name?
Yes.
Because we've not given that story yet.
No. So that's a story in itself. So that arguably was one of the scariest moments that we've had, bar the Cashflow situation. We'd engaged with an agency to undertake the rebrand, and we'd paid them a fee. The process was going to take about 12 weeks, and we were 6 weeks in, and originally we were going to keep the name Knocktails because we liked it. We thought it kind of fit what we were trying to do at the time, and we hadn't really thought too much about the future. About 6 weeks into the process, we got a letter, or Ranj got a letter from Europe's largest IPO law firm. It was a cease and desist. They had an American client who had registered the trademark for Knocktails 4 years and 9 months ago. And under trademark law, if someone hasn't used a trademark in 5 years, it's null and void. So we were 3 months short. And at the time of doing research, Ranj thought it's not going to be a problem because there's no way they're going to use it in 3 months.
Yeah. I had that with On Paper. There were so many people with a trademark linked to it, but they'd never used it. So you kind of just have to risk it a bit, don't you? You can't be 100% sure.
Exactly. So he did decide to risk it when launching the business, and it came back to bite us. So the letter said you've got 2 weeks to shut your business down, or we're going to file a huge law case against you. Massively scary for us because we had no idea about anything to do with law and trademarks and that whole world. Fortunately, we had put in an application to trademark it in the first place, so we'd kind of almost covered our backs, but they challenged it. So we were left in a situation where we were also halfway through this rebrand process where we'd paid half the fee to the agency, working on the principle that we were going to be using one name. And as you know, the name has a huge impact on kind of how you position the brand and how you make it work aesthetically. So it was almost like a double hit for us. So we spent the best part of 2 weeks. And I remember every single day we were having meetings at 6:30 in the morning, our first one. That would go on until about 9 a.m. where we were just talking about names. What we started thinking, can we think of like an old scientist and use his name? Or could we think of like, what's the first cocktail ever invented? Can we have a play on words with that? Didn't find anything for 2 solid weeks. And the agency started coming to us saying, look, we need a name. We can't delay this process anymore. We've got loads more work to do. So we're getting really, really stressed at this point. And at one point, I remember we had a list of maybe 10 alternative names that we were potentially going to go with. And we found reasons not to for all of them. And it was really kind of demoralizing process. And then one evening, I was speaking to a friend's mum who happened to study a master's in IPO law. And she said, look, they're just trying to scare you. If you write back to them and reasonably and ask them for an extension, I'm sure they would give it to you. And this was 2 days before the end of the deadline. So I went back to the letter to read through it one final time, just to make sure I understood it all. And I got to the bottom of it. And the name of the managing partner who'd written to us was Mr. Dixon. And I remember something clicked in my head, and I called Ranj and Sim immediately. And I said, boys, I mean, this law firm has really screwed us over here. And there's something about this guy's name, Dixon, that I think kind of fits the cocktail vibe, right? It sounds a little bit pretentious, but maybe too pretentious. Ranj and Sim started kind of throwing ideas back and forth, and then Mixton came up. And then Mixtons came up. And that's kind of where the origin came from. It was almost a fuck you to the law firm.
I write that.
But at the same time, it kind of makes sense because it's mixing, Mixtons. Like there's quite a few subtle ways that it works, and it's unique. I remember from a branding perspective, I'd heard the founder of Expedia talking about building brand names, and he said, as long as your brand name contains a high-scoring letter from Scrabble, then it will be more memorable. Obviously, he was Expedia. So
I write that.
Amazon, yeah. So for me, it kind of ticked all the boxes. The boys loved it too. And then we went to the branding agency, and we proceeded with Mixtons, and that's where it came from.
I love those stories where in the trenches of it, it feels like the worst thing is happening to you. And then when you look at it with hindsight, you realize actually this is happening for you. Yeah. Like this is actually a blessing in disguise, but you can't always see it in the moment.
Every time, every challenge that we faced is a blessing. And it's got to a point now where we talk about it, we call it the thumb. If you were to imagine a challenge being a giant thumb that's pushing down on the entire business, we always joke and say, when's the next thumb coming? And it's reached a point now where we enjoy it because we know it's coming. 2 months ago, we had a giant thumb. And instead of panicking, I remember Ranj was reading an email. Instead of panicking, we were like, okay, let's get stuck in. Like it almost became an enjoyable process.
Yeah.
So having that mindset that no challenge is too big, nothing is going, unless you break the law, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a different kettle of fish. But as long as you're above board, no challenge is too big.
And there's always a possible solution.
Always a
somewhere.
solution.
And it becomes fun, doesn't it?
Totally.
Like it's that mindset, isn't it, of seeing it not like, gosh, this thing's in my way, but more, oh, how can we work out how to get around this?
Yeah.
And the idea of, I don't know right now how this is going to be a blessing in disguise, but I'm excited to find out how.
Yeah.
I remember feeling that way about lockdown. Obviously a privileged thing to be able to think. It didn't majorly affect my business in a negative way, but really thinking like, I'm so curious and quite excited. You know, this is hard, but I know that out of the tough stuff comes the good stuff.
Always.
And it's an interest to see what's gonna.
Have you ever heard the phrase seek discomfort?
Yes.
I think there's a group of YouTubers called Yes Theory that have branded it, if you like. But I'm a huge believer in seeking discomfort, seeking things that are challenging in order to grow. What you'll see, and we'll all know people that are stagnant who never left the village that they grew up in from school or never did anything with themselves, and they're perfectly content, but they're equally perfectly comfortable. On the flip side of that, if you've got big ambitions and you want to go somewhere and you really want to achieve a lot, you have to seek discomfort, because if you're a lot of people have fears naturally. Some people are scared of public speaking, some people are scared of meeting investors, some people are scared of social situations, but the more you do it, and it's such a cliche thing, but the more you do things, the less uncomfortable they become.
Yeah.
3 years ago, I would have never sat and agreed to speak on a podcast with you. No way. 3 years ago, I would never have posted about my mental health on LinkedIn. But all of those things have become so rewarding to me, and I've got so much from them, just from a personal satisfaction perspective, that I then realized that, okay, if I apply that to all of the areas in my life, then inevitably it's going to enrich me. So it's really an attitude that I try and keep with everything.
Yeah. And resilience is a muscle, isn't it? Like the more that you practice it, the easier it gets to do it.
Yeah.
And it's trying not to see it in extremes. Is it like, okay, if I've got a fear of public speaking, step one probably isn't to do a TED talk.
No.
But maybe step one is like, oh, I'll record a voiceover for something, and that grows my confidence one step. And it's proving to your brain, isn't it, that the fears aren't a reason to stop.
Yeah.
Actually, if anything, they're a green flag to keep going in that
100%.
direction. And if you feel that discomfort, as long as it's partnered with a little bit of excitement and a little bit of maybe there's something here that feels purposeful to me, for me at least, that's a green flag to go for it. I remember when
Definitely.
I came up with the idea for On Paper, I was so like, God, this is going to be uncomfortable, but actually game on, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And the good stuff comes from that. And it does get easier the more you do it, right? Like you're sat here now, like you said, loving those moments that feel really challenging, but it's only through going through challenges and realizing that, number one, you can get to the other side of them, and number two, they always hold something good.
Totally.
But it's easier to have that mindset.
And also, the other perspective or realization that I've had is that all fear is irrational. Unless you've got a tiger running at you and it looks pissed off, because some tigers are friendly, right? If it looks like a pissed off tiger and you're out in the wild, then be scared. Yeah. Run away. Most of the fears that we face in day-to-day life are irrational and often come from a place of unresolved something within people. If you can face your fears on the daily, you will slowly start to realize, like you say, you'll slowly start to build that muscle, and you'll slowly start to realize that there's not much to be afraid of. As long as you're pushing yourself and as long as you have confidence in yourself, which also comes with time, comes with kind of baby steps. Don't expect, like you say, to stand on stage at the O2 and be able to sing like Ed Sheeran. Like, it's just not going to happen. But if you can take baby steps towards the things that do make you uncomfortable, then ultimately it's going to benefit you, it's going to benefit your business, it's going to benefit your friends and family, because you're going to be more content. And ultimately that is life's goal, is to be content.
Yeah. God, I love that phrase of like fear at the end of the day is most of the time just quite irrational and quite made up. And when you really explore it. That's why I always say to clients, like, I'm no mindset coach, but if someone's feeling the fear, I'm like, well, let's feel it. Let's talk, like, what is the worst case scenario here? And so often, especially when we're running like online businesses, the worst that could happen is basically nothing.
Yeah.
Like, what, someone thinks it's a bit weird, or it doesn't go as well as you thought. Well, great, that teaches you a lesson about something, that gives you a piece of data. I think it's so easy to get consumed by the fear, especially I think when you're working in a environment that you're not surrounded by loads of other people, to rationalize yourself.
Yeah.
But actually, to explore it and realize, God, that, there's not a tiger running at me going to kill me. Yeah. It's going to be okay.
Exactly.
I've got this.
And the other thing is, don't expect too much of yourself. I realized this being a natural slight perfectionist. When I used to take my first set of calls with investors, which would have been on my last business 3-4 years ago, I was shit scared. I was terrified. But after the first 3 or 4, I realized that they're not there to interrogate me. I'm not on a police interview. They're just trying to find out about my business, about me, about what my vision is. And it's really that simple. But the first few, I was having irrational thoughts about feeling like I was being watched and feeling like I was being judged, and every word I said, because I was presenting something I cared so much about, that they hated. But over time, I've really kind of flipped that perspective and said, nobody cares about anything as much as you do. And so if you can, or it's almost like when you're standing on stage and trying to visualize people naked, right? If you can get to the point where you realize that people in general are curious, they'd like to find out about what you're doing and what you're working on, but they're not there to judge you. They're not there to criticize you, because you don't do that to other people, right? If you're listening to someone's crazy business idea, you're not tearing it down, and you're just listening, right? So often your biggest challenge is getting out of your own way. And that's the whole process of seeking discomfort, because you are ultimately the only person that's in the way of yourself and where you want to be.
And do you find that easier to do having co-founders, being in a team of 3, having those people there that can perhaps tell you when something's being a bit irrational, or remind you of, hey, you're the one getting in your own way?
Definitely. I mean, something that I'm really, really, really keen on, and we've implemented in the business, is to make sure that we have space for open communication. And I think in all relationships in your life, whether it's partner, whether it's family, whether it's friends, business, having that open communication channel means that you can help each other grow, because it's non-judgmental. And if you can give each other feedback that is constructive and say, look, Zav, I know that you're like this. I know that you struggle, for example, doing mundane tasks and doing operations, which I do. Like I question everything, and I really struggle to apply myself when it's something that's super structured. They'll say to me, okay, well, don't spend your time worrying about that or doing that. Like, focus all of that good energy in a place where it's beneficial. And we have that constant feedback cycle. Every 2 weeks we sit down and we have a 2-3 hour conversation about, right, let's look at ourselves and how we're working. Are we using our skills and our kind of natural tendencies to the best, or in the best way? Or are we ending up in rabbit holes, which all humans naturally can do if they're focusing their energy in the wrong places? Because everyone's got different skill sets. You can't force someone who's not good at finance to be good at finance. And part of a good co-foundership is understanding where those strengths and weaknesses are, and enabling each other to really focus the right energy in the right place. So I think that's, super critical, and I'm very grateful for in Ranj and Sim.
It's so much self-awareness, isn't it? Which I think if business does one thing universally, it's make you very self-aware.
Massively.
Because you are daily confronted by, I'd say more so your weaknesses than your strengths in business. You're just always figuring more out about yourself. And that's something I've always admired in you, is how self-aware you are. I think you're a very self-aware person in terms of understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, where you sit best, where you don't. How have you got to that point? Because self-awareness, you don't wake up with it. It's not a natural characteristic or trait, is it? So what's it looked like for you to build that very clear understanding of, this is me at my best, and this is therefore how I need to be working? Can you think of times where you weren't so self-aware?
So humans are the way that they are through my understanding of psychology, and through having been in therapy myself, because of their scripts. So everyone, depending on how they were raised, the developmental period between 0 and 7 years old is like the most critical period of life for humans. And in that period is where you learn basically who you are. You learn how to treat people, you learn how to deal with situations, you learn your fears, your phobias, your joys, like all of the things that make you who you are practically imprinted in you in that time period. I think self-awareness, people have to varying degrees for different reasons. I think some people are completely oblivious to how they are and how they feel, whereas other people are highly, highly sensitive. And I'd put myself in that highly sensitive category, if you like. So it can be a blessing and a curse, because while sometimes it means that I can look at myself and go, okay, I understand my strengths and weaknesses, and I understand how I can really add value, or also where I'm destructive in situations. But equally, it means that I'm a massive overthinker. So there's so many kind of pros and cons to being self-aware, and equally there are pros and cons to being unself-aware, because it probably means you're going to have a more blissful life in some ways, right?
We've talked about that before, haven't we?
Yeah.
People who, I think it applies for a lot of things, people who aren't that self-aware, who aren't that connected to their mission, who don't really maybe realise how unfulfilled they might be. I just think, well, that looks like quite an easy life.
Yeah.
Because yes, you're maybe not as fulfilled as you could be, but you're not aware of it. Whereas I feel like we are in constant pursuit of not just success, whatever that means for us, but also kind of self-actualization. Like every single day trying to be a better version of yourself. It's kind of exhausting sometimes.
It is exhausting. The thing that's really important for me here is that there's no right or wrong, and there's no better or worse.
And just as before, there's not a destination.
No.
It's not like here is Xav at optimum, we are reaching that. It's just constant improvement. Right?
I suppose not only in business, but also in kind of personal life. Understanding that everybody's different is so key. Like I can't stress the importance of understanding that fundamental thing, because how you react to situations is going to be vastly different to how other people react, and this is all based on what their script is. Because however you were raised, like I said, in that period, you're going to be repeating that same script for the rest of your life. You can make subtle changes, you can address certain things that you may not enjoy about yourself, and also expedite the things that you do enjoy about yourself. But ultimately, people are the way that they are for life. It's really quite rare or impossible to fully change your personality between being born and dying. So when it comes to self-awareness, I'm a huge believer in it being something innate. So your capabilities of self-awareness, some people are just higher, some people are just lower. And it's the same with any other feeling or emotion. Some people are happier than others, some people are angrier than others, some people are more anxious than others. But when it actually comes to developing self-awareness, I think it is something that everyone can work on and address. I think the first step is really listening to yourself. If you're presented with something that makes you feel anything, listen to that emotion before reacting. Yeah. Because I think, again, that you have reactive people and unreactive people. You have people who deal in emotion and people who deal in reflection. And these are all like concepts and kind of principles that are guided by psychology. But self-awareness, whilst it's going to be different for everyone, is all about just understanding how you feel and realizing how you feel about certain situations. Because if you're going through life ignoring what your body is physically telling you, for me, it's a physical thing, how I feel emotion, right? For some people, I know that it's in their head. For some people, it's more a cognitive function. But for me, it's something that I feel. If I ignore what I feel and I react based on what my script has taught me to react, then I'm going to be in an endless cycle of never getting anywhere. Whereas if I take the time to reflect, and everybody will reflect in different ways, but take the time to reflect, take the time to really listen to how you feel about a certain situation, and also take the time to challenge yourself and go, why did I feel that way? Is that how I want to feel? Or is that how my script has basically led me to feel? And a good exercise for this is actually looking at people you admire and listing characteristics of those people, and then listing characteristics about yourself and seeing if they align. If they don't align, then you have work to do, because it means that the things you see in other people, you can only see if you are yourself. But equally, how you view yourself is only a reflection of how you view yourself. It's not the truth. So you could list 10 things about Xav, and I'm sure that they're going to be vastly different to the 10 things I list about myself. Yours is more true than mine. Yeah. How I view myself is only true for me. But having that self-awareness means that you can go, okay, this thing that Xav said and this thing that Alice said was different. How do I reach a place where I feel about myself to match what Alice has said and what people around me say?
And so much of it is asking questions of yourself, isn't it? And almost holding space to explore. That's what I think therapy is so good for, is that it's literally time where there's nothing else to do other than to explore yourself more.
Definitely.
And to think about, like you said, why did I do a certain thing, or why do I feel a certain way? And trusting that there is going to be an answer.
Yeah.
I see it a lot when doing work with clients around, like, naming their values or naming their purpose. We're not coming up with something. You're actually just finding the answer within yourself.
Yeah.
Not in like a woo, the universe isn't going to deliver it to you kind of way, but in a, no, the information's already there. You've just got to listen to what the information is, or what your actions are telling you about that information.
So another really important thing to add to that is appreciating that working on yourself is not hippy dippy spiritual bullshit. You don't have to have anything wrong with you to seek therapy. I wouldn't say that I have anything inherently wrong with me. I see it as the gym for my brain. If I'm able to go to therapy and add perspective, and I think perspective is another key to business, and it's another key to kind of life, personal life.
Yeah.
If you can add more perspective that makes you realize that sometimes the way that you're viewing things is not the only way, ultimately it will enable you to find better solutions to problems, to overcome challenges that were insurmountable before, but also to be a more balanced human. I think perspective is the key that unlocks all of that, and it all begins with accepting that those two things. One, for the majority of people, there's nothing wrong with you. Some people do suffer from mental illness, but everyone has mental health. So make sure to address that. And two, I would say to anyone that has a gym membership, you're a hypocrite if you don't have a therapist. Because
the two are equally important, right? And we care about our businesses and we care about growth and success and impact, but the center of all of those things is us and our mental and our physical health. And if those two things aren't good, if they're not where they need to be, well, then nothing else is going to be.
If I was to ask you the question, imagine you are 70 years old. Would you rather have a good body or a good mind? What would you say to me?
A good mind.
So that in itself means that, because there is a stigma around therapy, there's a stigma around mental health still. It's being far more talked about these days, and that's a brilliant thing. But most people would choose mind. And so why aren't you working on it? I'm not saying you.
Yeah.
Why do people not work on it?
Yeah.
Because it's the thing that allows you to be you, right? Your mind is you and you are your mind.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you make that the best version of itself possible? Because your body by 35, 40 is pointless. Like you can be Arnold.
Shout out to 35, 40-year-olds listening. Your body's pointless. Heard it here first.
No, but you could be Arnold Schwarzenegger, but at some point it starts declining naturally.
Yeah. It's also just vastly irrelevant. What I'd say is health is important. That's a massive thing this year's taught me, is I've never really thought. I've always thought about the way I look after my body for how it looks, not for how it feels.
Yeah.
And this year's especially really taught me, actually, it's about being healthy so you can then show up for the things that are important to you.
Definitely.
But no, you're so right. And that is an interesting question to ask, isn't it? Like, when you are older, not just around that question, like, how will you measure success? As a 70-year-old, what will you feel proud of? And then how can we act according to that?
And that's the thing. Most people would say that by the time they're 70, 80, the two things they'd want to be able to do is have a body that's able to walk and function. So to not grossly neglect your body to a point where you can't do either of those things, and equally to be able to be of sound mind. And I think ultimately, like you say, looking after your body from a health perspective, critical. Looking after your mind, view it as the same thing. It's from a health perspective. And it allows you to unlock doors that, for me, frankly, if I hadn't undertaken the journey with mental health, I can guarantee the Mixtons would not be where it is. And I know that it's the same for the boys because they're developing at the same time. So for all of us, it's kind of key, It's at the forefront of everything we do. It's at the forefront of how we communicate with our employees. For us, it's mental health over everything, then enjoyment, then profit.
And it's seeing how they all work together, right? Like I think business can very easily damage your physical and mental health. But actually, if you put your physical and mental health first, your business is going to be successful as a result.
Totally.
Whereas if you put your business first, your mental and physical health are going to be damaged. And if those two things are damaged, then at some point the business will fail as well.
Yeah.
So it's seeing it in the same way that money is a tool, those things are tools. Like I quite happy saying, I don't care about my health because I care about health. I'm not one of those people who's naturally like, I really care about what I put because I just don't care that much. The only way I care about it is because I know that when I'm healthier, the business is better.
Right.
And I care about the business.
Exactly. And that's what I one thing I fucking hate, Alice, is hustle culture. Right? This whole mentality that you have to be working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week in order to get anywhere in life. Such bullshit. And you and I are quite similar in this way because we've spoken about it before. So for context, whenever we have a really busy period, we need time to ourselves, right? We're natural introverts, and for us, that's what works. For other people, they'll be natural extroverts and they'll enjoy the hustle and bustle and busyness of life. But taking time to regenerate, recuperate, do things that you enjoy, as you say, is going to mean that any time you do spend on your business is going to be far more productive because you're going to be of clearer mind. Your body will hopefully be feeling good. Your mind will be feeling good. And I'm a real big believer. I think it was Google that first implemented this in the kind of architecture of structuring your working day, not to maximize time input, but to maximize productivity in your way.
Yeah.
For some people, and myself included, I can do better work in 2 hours than I can if I was to work 14 hours. And understanding that and not feeling guilty about the fact that I'm not hustling every single fucking day. And accepting the way that I work is, for me, paramount. And I think more people would benefit from having that perspective that you don't have to put all of your time in because ultimately it's not the best thing for your business.
It's output over input, isn't it?
Always.
I'd way rather be productive than busy.
Yeah.
But my tendency is to want to be busy because that feels like success. But you're right. And then it's balancing that, which is a whole nother conversation, with it's valuing your output, but also knowing there's seasons where the input is going to look really intense. Yeah. But it's giving it a purpose, isn't it? It's knowing 100%. Like I will label in my business, this is a busy season. And I don't even use the word busy because it makes it feel like it's happening to me. I just say it's full on for this season and I can do it for a sprint. But yeah, there comes a point where then if that was forever, it's too much.
And that's the thing, you have to be willing to get in the trenches. Like the trenches are inevitable, but it's not about being in the trenches all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of premise of what I'm advocating is making sure that when you're out of the trenches, take some time, like relax. Don't try and jump it back in as soon as you can because it's completely pointless. But also you have to accept the fact that the trenches are inevitable, and you have to figure out a way to deal with that.
I think that's a perfect place to end.
Great.
There's so many other things we could talk about. I want to talk about having 2 co-founders. We didn't even talk about how your dyslexia interacts with your business, but another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
I'll have to have you back on with
the
Sim
boys.
Ranj.
Yeah, we can do a 3.
Do some Mixtons cocktails beforehand.
Sounds great.
It's going to be chaos.
It would be carnage.
4. I've done a 3-person and that was chaos. So I think 4 would be a whole nother level. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
There's no other answer than yes to that
I got a really great juice out of it as well, so I'm happy.
Tastes absolute trash. Come on Alice's podcast and you'll get given
don't do
carrot juice.
Not
you could have had the broccoli
drink.
one.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. Well, that's the thing. If this is carrot and mango, I'd hate to know what the broccoli and spinach one was.
Yeah, if I was that person selling those, I would actually feel guilty handing them out.